All right. Hey, gamers. As we talked about earlier in the show, as Bender was talking about his time with Mages of Mistralia, we said we had somebody on from Borealis Games, and here he is, Patric Mondou. He is
Hey
the
guys.
creative director behind Mages of Mistralia. Patric, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. We know you got a lot going on today. It's launch day. But we always try to get somebody on from within the gaming industry because, as we've said before many a time, we're just gamers. We're not even journalists. We don't have any experience developing games. So we like to get people on from within the gaming industry to kind of shine a light on the things that go on behind the scenes of game development and all that entails. So thank you again. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
It's a pleasure, man.
Cool.
Yeah. Just to echo what Brent said, Patrick. We really appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time. We know it's crazy. You guys just launched the game on consoles today, so I know there's a lot of excitement, a lot of craziness happening around the office. Yeah, we just appreciate the opportunity to chat with you for a few minutes.
It's a pleasure. That's why we do these games, right? So to have these
Yeah.
chats and to engage with people in the community. So that's great, actually.
Awesome, man. Now for those who might be unfamiliar with Borealis Games, can you give us just a brief, I don't know, just a Cliff Notes version of the studio's history? Is Mages is your first title as a studio? Is that right?
Yeah, it is. So we started this whole adventure in 2014. We like the founders of the studio. We're all from different backgrounds. Some of us from more AAA studios. I was in the mobile industry, and we had some in other indie companies. And so we bunched up together, and we started this thing trying to make a game with a maybe slightly bigger scope, a bigger scope than most other indies, and for most of us it was like the biggest game so far that we've made, and for others from the AAA, it was more like it was a like cute little project. So, but because we had all these different backgrounds, we were able to uh, scope the game correctly and try to make it, to make something great out of the time that we had for the budget that we had. When we started in 2014, we were aiming for a 30 months production. We ended up using just a little bit more than that, but we stayed somewhat within the range of acceptable limits for our game. And so yeah, we've been doing only Mages of Mistralia for almost 3 years now. We went public for the first time last year only, so we're still new to going public and all of that. So we're still an infant, basically infant stages of the company.
Gotcha. What if you could boil it down, like what would you say your guys' mission statement is as a studio, so to speak?
So you see, most of us liked working in the AAA studios. We like the vibe, we like the kind of products that we make. It's just that eventually we get to a point, right, where we have a few titles under our belt. We know how to make games, and obviously we want to try something that's a bit different. I remember for myself when I was at Gameloft in the mobile industry, I was making games, but I would always use the limitation of using a mobile device like a phone or an iPad. And for some of my coworkers, it's something different. It's another other type of limitation that's often for bigger companies related to the game direction. Having a board of executives just drive the direction or the philosophy of the games that they make. And so, we wanted to make a company that's all about making accessible games because we're big fans of Nintendo. We grew up with the 8-bitness console. We're from that era where everything seemed so simple, but at the same time, making a game was such a feat because it was all a lot of programming and even like engineering, because you had to print the cartridges and stuff. So it's like, and we really I think that we really admire Nintendo for what they were able to make with that era or that generation of consoles, which are games that are easily picked up, and you can have fun like very quickly with a Nintendo game, especially from that era. And so it's something that we wanted to have in our games. And at the same time, because we're small and because we're smaller than other studios, and because we love making games, and because we're passionate gamers ourselves, we wanted to make games that are also slightly more innovative than what we see out there. So we wanted to experiment with new game systems, with new features that are like really unusual, and to use them in a way that everyone can enjoy them and share with their family, their friends. And so that's how we had the idea originally of Mage, because Mages in Australia is just that. It's a game that anybody can enjoy, or at least I hope. Everyone has the potential of enjoying the game, at least. And for the more hardcore gamers and the passionate gamers out there, where there is enough stuff to delve into, and you can really spend some time exploring the core mechanic that we have. So I think as a studio, I think that our first game really nails the philosophy and the direction that we want to have as a company.
Yeah, you're NES, you're speaking my language, man. Those are my formative years as a gamer. So I'm always down to go back and revisit that philosophy of game making. Now in terms of Mages, Patrick, what's what's the elevator pitch for the game? How would you describe it to someone who's never played it before? How would you describe the gameplay or the way Mages plays?
Sure. Mages of Australia is it's an action adventure game. It's a classic action adventure game uh, that that's all built around the concept of being a mage, a spellcaster. So it's a game in which you create your own spells in order to defeat the monsters and complete the puzzles that are laid out before you in the adventure. Uh, so if I can go a little bit more into detail for that, it's really it all comes down to the point that we felt as gamers, because that's how it started, really, us playing games and wondering, hey, how come I never feel like a mage or a spellcaster whenever I play a fantasy game? I could think of, and it's less true now, but when we started thinking of the game, it was like almost no other game had even mentioned the fact that we wanted to that they wanted the player to experience what it is to truly be a mage. And then we started like thinking of like just brainstorming ideas. Back then, me and my like the studio co-founder Felix, we were at the university. We were colleagues back then at University of Quebec in Montreal, and we had this idea for a spellcasting system involving gestures. And I remember that there was a game that was announced for the PS Move called Sorcery, I think, and we were like, we were thinking of something along those lines, but more procedural systems where each gesture has a meaning, like in the game, and we just kept thinking of that idea. Meanwhile, we were grinding XP in the video game industry, and eventually Magica came out. And we were like, "Oh, Magica, that's awesome!" And it's a great game. And it plays. It's super fun. It's arcade. You can pick up a friend. You learn how to play in 5 minutes, and it's super funny. And it really nails something I think that no other game in the like that in which you play mages have done before. And that's actually giving you a complete experience of being a mage in that universe. And that's just memorizing sequences of buttons basically on a keyboard, and obviously because you're feeling pressed by the enemies, you make mistakes, and these mistakes turn out to be funny. So we thought the game was great, and we were wondering how further we could go, because we were thinking that that's one version of what it is to be a mage, but we're like wondering how would it be to actually understand how magic works, understand the inner workings of the spell systems, like the behaviors and stuff. Just like if we were the first mage to invent these spells, and so that's how it all began a few years ago, anyways.
Well, our reviewer Bender, he absolutely loved Mages of Mystralia. He actually issued a score today. It's one of our few perfect scores that we've ever given. He absolutely loved the game, but in particular, he really enjoyed the puzzle solving in the game. And he was curious, who designed the puzzles in Mages, and can you talk a little bit about what's the process that it takes to create a good puzzle?
Sure, good question. Hey, we started off knowing that we would need to do puzzles, to design puzzles for the game, and that's the whole reason why we did an action adventure game with it. Like, we had a cool system, we had this idea of being a mage, but then, like I said, with the philosophy of our studio, how do you make a game like that accessible? Mm-hmm. It basically, especially at the beginning when we started the project, was basically just programming spells. And funnily enough, just a side here note, we encountered a game when we were working on Mages that did just that, programming magic, and that was called Code Spells. You should look it up, Code Spells. And anyways, it's a neat little game to teach kids how to program. And we thought it was, that's great, that's awesome. And then it immediately confronted us with the idea that it was not like, it was a programming teaching tool. So obviously, this was not accessible in the way that we were thinking it. We wanted something that's accessible for, a family game, basically, something that anyone can enjoy. And we started thinking, this needs to be an adventure, and there's no better way than a Metroidvania kind of progression to unlock each spell component one by one, and make sure that the player kind of masters each of them in the right order, so that they get where we're going, like what kind of strategy we're going for in the end game with the spell crafting system. And so all our puzzles are designed as basically as I wouldn't want to say tutorials, but as maybe learning steps or milestones in the player progression as a mage. Mm-hmm. And we had so many different people working on the puzzle designs in the game. You were asking who made it. Well, it's Borealis Games did the puzzles. We had some do more puzzles than others, but essentially it's really a group effort of iterating on the puzzles that we had, making sure that they were the right ones. We had two level designers in the game who did very, very good job. Samuel Bernier and David, who really had a good eye, I think, for puzzles that were easy to grasp at the first glance, so that you kind of get what you need to do, but the steps of how to do it are kind of blurred. So I think we got to a point where we eventually, and strangely enough, that was very deep down in production, we knew what kind of puzzle we needed for the player to progress as a mage. Mm-hmm. And that was like maybe 2 or 3 months before we shipped on PC. It was really like a long process before we were really, okay, that's the way we need to make the puzzles. And as a result, maybe I think we only barely just scratched the surface of the potential that we had as a puzzle game. I could say as far as puzzles go in an action adventure game, at least. And we think that in the future, if we ever go for more content for the game or sequels or whatnot, we have tons of crazy ideas that we could do with it. We're only just beginning, I think, the process of making fun stuff for mages.
That's awesome, because I played a little bit earlier today. I played it for an hour or so, and I ran into a couple of these puzzles. And some of them, like you said, you can look at it and you're like, I know how I have to solve it, but how you solve it can be a little tricky. A lot of it, some of it's timing, some of it's and one thing Bender mentioned that I do like that's in the game is there's a hint station at most of these puzzles, and some of them that will tell you, do you have the abilities to solve this, instead of sitting there for 20, 30 minutes banging your head against the wall because you can't figure it out, but you actually don't have the correct spells to pull them off. So I did appreciate that. But some of those puzzles are actually pretty tricky, and I really enjoy what I've played so far with those. But I want to touch on the crafting system now for a moment. The spell crafting has been a favorite of those who have played the game. It's obviously one of probably the biggest crux of the game. How did you come up with the idea for the spell crafting system, and did you hit any roadblocks in your efforts to make it as intuitive as possible?
Oh, hell yeah. Roadblocks. It's all about roadblocks. We had so many roadblocks, it felt like I was in a police chase. Yeah. The spell system, we started off knowing, what I mentioned, right, that it kind of felt like a programming tool, at least at some point in the production. We had this, we started off just deciding how to split up the spell system. What are the modules? What are the smallest components of a spell? So we have like the elements, right? Is it fire? Is it cold or whatever? Mm-hmm. Is it a behavior, or is it just a tweaking? Some things are like have a larger effect or a more dramatic effect on the spells than others. And then we have all the matter of timing. At the beginning, we wanted to do like anything that can be done in a game with magic. We wanted it possible in the game. Of course, we had to lower our expectations at some point, but like we wanted, like, do you wish to channel your spell? So like you constantly cast it and does something. Do you wish to have a long casting time, and at the end of this 5 seconds casting, it shoots like a super extreme spell? Do we want it to be instantaneous? So we thought of all the spell systems that we knew, Dungeons and Dragons, all the MMOs, Diablo, some other spells like maybe Sorcery, the game that came out, or Magica. These were good references too. And we were like, okay, so how small do we want our modules to be, our components? And once we made that, the first step was to create a system where we could basically just just decide whether a spell has these different behaviors or whatever, and see how many different variables we needed to tweak in order for it to be interesting. And at that point, the spells were super ugly, because making the spell system influence the effects, the particle systems that we had in the game was very, very hard. And we didn't even know if we wanted this specific configuration yet for the components. And I think it took us a year just to get there, and wow. we were at a loss at that point a little bit, because we had spent so much time on the spell system that we had almost we couldn't start with the level design and the world design yet, because we didn't know how to design puzzles, or how to design monsters, or how to design progression blockers in the game, and we didn't have anything. We didn't have a story yet. We didn't have character design had just begun. So we even thought of doing the game in 2D at some point, just to simplify things. And then we started playing. We started bringing in playtesters from our community, our group of friends from the industry, or just friends, period. We brought them in, had them play the game, and get some feedback. And that's where it really started just changing, because well, first of all, we noticed that programming was not for everyone. So everyone was utterly failing at creating even the simplest spell, or understanding why they failed at. And that's actually the bad part, because I don't mind players not getting it the first time, but they need to understand why they failed it. And that's the basis of any good game. I think any good accessible game. Every Nintendo game does that. They have whether it's Zelda or Mario or whatever, they start off giving you a challenge that you will fail, but you understand why you failed it, and you figure out how to circumvent that in the future. And we iterated. Eventually, we dumbed the system down to something that was really, really uninteresting, that amounted to just customization like you would have in Diablo 3 with the rune system. Mm-hmm. We were a bit disappointed with that, but we kept on working, and we went back and forth from something that's overly complex to something that's way too basic, and we just kept doing that until we just found the balance right between the two.
Yeah, it's really impressive because when I first got in there and I got my first couple runes, I was like, oh, okay, I can put one of these things, and I put one with the fire ability, and it was the move rune, and I was like, oh, now I can shoot my fireballs. Like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I got into combat, and I was like, I like this shield, and I was like, well, wait a minute, I realized I can use this rune on one of these other different abilities, and I put it over where the shield is, and now I have a dodge ability. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really going to open up quite a bit the more runes that I get. So I mean, it's simple and it's intuitive and understanding how it works, but there's a lot of depth there with all the different types of runes that you can be able to use. So I think that's really, really interesting. I think that was implemented very, very well early on. I can't wait to see how badass my mage can get with some more of these runes. So very cool stuff.
Thank you.
One of the other things Bender wanted to ask you about was he was impressed by how deep the narrative and the lore actually was. I mean, for a game like this that specializes in the spells, you would think it's more focused on gameplay, but you guys went out and started working with Ed Greenwood, legendary Ed Greenwood, on the narrative. How did that relationship start?
I was saying we were at that point where we felt that the game was really not advancing. The production was not advancing as quickly as we thought because we were spending so much time on the spell system. And one of the things that occurred to us at that point is that we would probably need help. Especially with us not being native English speakers, we thought, why not get a professional writer? And so we started looking for a writer, and it's super weird because Ed, at the same time, or like in the weeks before we started looking for a writer, he put out a video on YouTube asking basically asking the community of his fans for work. He was like, hey, I want to get into one of your projects. Pitch me your ideas. I want to be part of your projects. And we're like, wow, this is weird. We'll try. We're big fans of Ed anyways because we all played Dungeons and Dragons when we were kids, and if you played Dungeons and Dragons, obviously you know of the Forgotten Realms, and this guy invented the Forgotten Realms. So what better way to kickstart, the lore and the building the world of Mystralia? So, and at that point, we were not expecting him to return our call, even though he called for projects. We're like, yeah, we'll pitch a project about our project, which is about magic, and we're like, hey, you created the character of Elminster, so obviously you're the guy for for the work. And he immediately said yes. We sent him the demo of the game that we had so far. He really enjoyed it, so he poked us back. It really went quickly from that point on. We discussed what was our philosophy, what were our expectations, and what we had so far in terms of world building which was not that much. We had things, we had pointers and ideas, but no real link or coherence between all these different parts. And so, it took him a few weeks to get a first draft, and then he just, we asked him for, just say we would like to have maybe 10, 20 pages of both lore and maybe a few lines of dialogues for our main character at first. We'll start with that. He sent us like a 60 pages long text, full of excerpts from past, encyclopedic type of entries or articles, all the background stories of all the areas in the game. He even had some pointers for sequels. We're like, what?
Wow,
that's great. That's cool. So he's like a very creative guy, just constantly thinking of ideas. So yeah, it was on top of being just some sort of a nerd dream come true of working with him, it went super well. So I can't complain.
No, heck no, that's awesome.
That's a cool story. It's like the planets aligned for you guys, and it's just like meant to happen. That's cool. Patrick, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you were talking about the history of the studio, But in terms of like your inspirations, either for Mages or for the studio at a whole, is there anything specific like outside of Magica or maybe some specific Nintendo games that you guys look to as inspiration for your studio? Also, any I don't know, any cool development stories you guys have that you might want to share with us?
I'll start with maybe our the games that are inspire me at least.
Hmm.
I think we share most of these games as as strong inspirations. But of course, I'm a big Nintendo fan. But I think what compels me the most to play a game, what I find the most interesting in a game is how they can surprise us, how they can make us live an experience, think, and if a game is basically too similar to other games, or if it's if a game constantly just shows me things that I already know, or uses the same behaviors or same mechanics over and over again, I kind of get bored of them. And
Hmm.
I don't usually finish a game for the story. That's not my type of game, which is, like you said, strangely enough. I think it's one aspect that we worked a lot on Mages of Mistrella, but it was not our core focus. And you're right about it. And strangely enough, again, I'm just maybe gonna do a side note here. It might have caused us, some players and even some reviewers, to rate us more, or to critique us with more I would say like mitigated notes or reviews, simply because uh, we obviously didn't put as much energy and as much work on that, all the world building, as we did on the spell system. And of course, for some players who like games and like stories in games and like cinematics, they might feel that the game is not there yet. And I kind of agree with that, because we're not that type of gamer, because of what I'm gonna tell you right now. And that's a story in a game for me is not relevant, or it's fine if you have it, it's cool. It's just that a game is about living an experience, and often the best experiences are the stories that you make yourself.
Hmm.
And with that in mind, games in the recent past, like Minecraft, like Don't Starve, are so interesting, because they make me feel like all sorts of weird emotions, and they are very complete experiences. They are surprising. They make me think, and they don't need to be open world games either. Some other games have done that too. I could think of going further back. Maybe Braid did that. You could think of The Witness. Well, it's the same guy. I need to find another example. Maybe Blizzard games are kind of intriguing too, because they kind of touch the story. They're very strong with the story, but they have a lot of depth behind them too. You can think of Overwatch. Overwatch is very well done. It's like it's very polished,
Hmm.
but the story is not in your face.
Hmm.
It's very nicely done with environmental storytelling. And when you play the game, even though it's a multiplayer game, you kind of feel that you're actually in a game world that makes sense. And so I respect that, and that is what I'm looking for in games. And that's why maybe I had one of the strongest gameplay experience since I don't remember when we were wrapping up Mages. That's when Breath of the Wild came out. And I think that game, if I ever have to give a perfect score to a game, I don't see any game that I should give that perfect score to other than Breath of the Wild, simply because they have nailed that like perfectly, having like a narrative, but it's not forced on you. It's very well integrated into an exploration, and into a game that will make the player live his own story and his own experience.
Hmm.
And so for me, that's the perfect example of how you can achieve that. But it takes time. It takes years. And I'm pretty sure that they've done Breath of the Wild with more budget, not only more budget, but more time that on their hands than what we had when we started making mages.
Right.
So you wanted an anecdote? Well, that's one I could give you. When Breath of the Wild came out, I think that we were two in the studio who had a Wii U or a Switch or whatever that who played the game. Like I think we sickened the people in the studio so much about the Breath of the Wild that I'm sure that they were not gonna even try to play it for 6 months still because they can't hear us talk about that game anymore. Because every morning that we came in, we always had a story. Did you see this awesome mountain? I cannot believe they designed this in this specific spot. I cannot believe they went so far as to do, this specific thing. And it was constantly surprising me and just making me realize that we've only, even though, open world is a pretty established genre, like Nintendo once again just shows us that we've only just starting exploring what are the boundaries of that genre, just like they did with so many other genres before. So I'm pretty impressed by that.
Gosh, I tell you what, now it makes sense why Bender likes your games so much.
Yeah.
Your inspiration comes from Breath of the Wild. You love Breath of the Wild. He loves Breath of the Wild. You and Bender would have a lot to talk about.
It's interesting you mentioned Overwatch too, Patrick. That's a game where, like you said, it's a multiplayer focused game and it doesn't throw the story in your face. The really interesting thing about that game is how the players almost have created the story, like behind the scenes. Like there's all this fan fiction and like people really go nuts for these characters, and they Blizzard puts out a little animated video every now and then to introduce one of these characters. But other than that, it's the player base has created this whole story around it. It's really interesting to watch how that plays out.
And I would say the same for Minecraft and so many other games out there that kind of give the tools for the players to just create something wild. And I think in the case of Overwatch, Blizzard kind of gave them just a little push there with like you mentioned, the animated videos that they put out. There's also all sorts of mini dialogues that you hear in game where some of the characters will just interact together, and sometimes it will give you an insight on what the world is about. So you kind of figure out the broad strokes of that world, that game world. So okay, so there are some robots called Omnics, and they have they're persecuted for some reason, and then you get that some of the characters are against these Omnics and others are trying to protect them. And so that's I think the best way to create a game is give some to the player. It's just like playing a D&D game. If you're a dungeon master and you're DMing your game, and you never let your players come up with their own expansion of the game world, then you're not playing the game right. A game like Dungeons and Dragons is also about letting the players define the backstory of their characters and letting them affect the game the world that you created. So I think it's only natural that in video games we strive or we aim to do that eventually. As the technologies and as the game development tools become more and more advanced, that we get the chance to actually try to do that. It's only natural that we actually do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just a couple more questions for you, Patrick. I know you guys have brought Mages of Australia to several PAX shows in the past. Bender actually was at the most recent PAX South when he got his hands on it. What was that experience like? And in what ways does the direct player feedback from the events like PAX help shape the game's development? I mean, I know at PAX, you got people coming in playing. They can only play for a short amount of time. But do you take that feedback back to the studio after you go to these shows?
Oh yeah, definitely. We're actually we're at the first show we did was PAX East. We were even communicating live with the studio and trying to hotfix some stuff that was happening in the game, because it was one of the first times that we had people play it without explanation, without us actually, for playtesters or whatever. Because it was really the first time where we could actually let players explore the spell system, and so we had all sorts of weird problems and crashes and blockers, and so we were constantly just sending emails back home. Guys, fix this, please. We really need it. We have a media outlet coming in, like GameSpot is coming. You really need to fix this. So it's not only for the bugs actually, though. It's more for, I think, getting a feel of the reception before we even launch or even have a pre-order, or way before we had a Kickstarter, way before we even thought we wanted to do a Kickstarter, we could have this feedback. And it's not the same you get by email or on a forum. It's really looking at the players, looking them straight in the eye and seeing how they react. Even though they say, "Oh, I had a great time," sometimes "I had a great time" means I had the best time today, or I had a okay time, but all the games here are cool. And nobody has an infinite budget for games, So we're like trying to see, hey, we want our game to be memorable. We want players to buy it eventually because we want to make more games in the future. So that player who's playing the game, what is he thinking? And so we can really analyze that much further when we're at an event. And one cool thing that's in an event too, and I really must not brush this aside, is the brotherhood of game developers that there are there at, and I wouldn't say only game developers. I would say game press, game developers, and esport players. They're all like a strong community, really tightly knit together. And when there are events at PAX, whether it's an event hosted by Twitch or by Sony, and there are tons at these events. So you go at a dinner or Sony party after one of the days at PAX, and this is where you bond with people that live through the same problems as you, that breathe and eat video games just as you do. Mm-hmm. And it's such a comforting thought to know that there are other people like you out there, and that you can exchange with them, and that eventually we all work towards the same goal, and that is entertain people.
Yeah, Patrick, you actually mentioned something there about Kickstarter. We also wanted to ask you a little bit about that. What was that experience like? Is Kickstarter something is that something you would consider again in the future?
I wouldn't do it the same way. We need to eventually discuss that. We didn't have the time to just discuss and just a post-mortem of the Kickstarter experience yet. But yeah, I don't know. All sorts of. I feel that we had to do it, and I think we succeeded at it too. It was a very successful Kickstarter, and would I want to do it again? I'm not even sure, because there are some aspects to it that we were not aware of that eventually occurred to us as we were finishing the Kickstarter. One of the things is that you kind of promise something. It's the first time you promise something, and if something goes bad, if you don't meet your deadlines, if you cannot do a feature, you kind of feel obliged to do them anyways. And even though they might end up being something that's not as nil or as polished as the other things that we've been developing in the rest of the production. So it's a very awkward feeling, and it's also you never want to disappoint the backers on Kickstarter. It's like 10 times worse than disappointing a player, because these players, these people believed in your product even before it was available. So they had nothing, like they didn't have a demo yet or whatever. They just trusted you. Yeah, I trust you that this game is going to be awesome. So they pledge money, and some of them pledge a lot of money. And I'm sure that everyone is just like me, meaning that they would like to spend as much money as they want on video games, but obviously you cannot. So you have to decide how you spend it. And so for players to decide to support our game, it meant a lot to us, and it's a pressure that was a bit disconcerting at the end of production there, as we wanted to wrap it up. And I think one thing we would do different, anyways, if we did a Kickstarter in the future, is try to put more distance between the Kickstarter and the expected release date, and be really, really open and honest about the promise of the game. And I would probably try to have much more interaction with the community after the Kickstarter, because it's something we didn't have the time to do. We did our Kickstarter, and you guys probably noticed that our game was very advanced when we started the campaign. We did it because we felt that, and we just had run out of budget. And we were thinking we could either release this game or we can spend a few extra months. We only needed like 3 extra months for PC or 2 extra months for PC and a few more months for for console. And then the game will be pretty much, we will be proud of what we've achieved, and it will be that, and it will be a great game, and a much greater game than what it would be if we hadn't done a Kickstarter. But it was a last minute decision nonetheless, and that is something that needs to change. Kickstarter needs to remain, maybe more than I thought when we started the campaign. It needs to remain a platform where the players and the community, or sometimes it's not games, it's some other product, but in which they can give their opinion and they can participate in the creation of whatever you're making.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question for you, Patrick. I know it's a little too soon to be looking down the line. I mean, obviously, Mages of Australia has just launched on console, but what's the future look like for Borealis Games and Mages of Australia? Without spoiling the ending of the game, Bender noticed that there might be an opening for a potential sequel. Is that a possibility that's being actively discussed within your studio?
It's actively discussed, and it's something that Mages of Australia is not something that we put out there on Steam and on PSN Store and on Good Old Games and on Xbox. It's something that we really hope and plan on improving in the very near future as much as we can. We're not done with this game yet. Even this version of the game. I'm not even talking about sequels. And then yes, sequels or DLCs or whatever, or just like content updates is something that we have in mind. We have so much room for expansion. I discussed earlier how we barely just scratched the surface of the possibilities with the spell systems and with the environmental puzzles, and that is true. And so there's a lot of I think there's a lot of content to be made for Mages, and I'm sure this will bring us to make eventually the actual sequel to the story itself. And if it's not soon, it's going to be not so soon, but still in a reasonable future, and within a foreseeable future at least. And we have so many other projects that we want to make, so we'll see what comes next. But one thing for sure is you've not seen the end of Mistralia. That's for sure.
Awesome. That's really good to hear. And this is the bonus question, and obviously I've seen your guys' Twitter account get asked this 1,000 times a day. We've got the PS4 version, we've got the Xbox One version, we've got one on PC, and now you got this little system that's getting pretty big, the Nintendo Switch. Yeah. Any interest in that platform?
Yeah, we do. We're very interested. I think it's a matter of priority for Nintendo. These guys have a new platform, so obviously they're giving priority to new games. And for them, a port of a game that's already out there is not as interesting. So I'm respecting their patience, or actually we're respecting their pace, and we're being patient about it because it's a company that we respect a lot. We want to be on the Switch. I think that we would appeal to that market a lot because it's a game that could benefit from being portable, that you can play with tiny sessions, tiny little bit of sessions, and it's also family-friendly game. So I would definitely see that game on Switch. One thing, like a few things, is obviously none of us have experience porting on the Switch yet. It's so new. So even if we could start the process right now, how much time would it take? We don't know. But it's. I would really like to see it out there on the Switch as fast as possible, but it won't be, at least this year. It's impossible for 2017, that's for sure.
Cool. Well, Patric, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to us, talk about Majors of Australia and Borealis games, kind of let our listeners know who you guys are and what the inspiration was behind your title. It's a great game. Bender loved it. I'm enjoying what I've played so far. It's reviewed very well on just about every platform it's been on. So I know you got a busy day today, but we can't thank you enough for being here, man. We really appreciate it, and we wish you guys the best of luck going forward, man.
Hey guys, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
Bye bye.
Take care,
Appreciate
man.
it.